You learn to read what people are willing to do and how much they're willing to pay. There's great value in working with someone over and over again, as long as there's success that follows that trail.
Your approach to fundraising is very pragmatic. It's different. It's refreshing.
How do you engage and entertain and keep the attention of everyone else in the room?
You're such a prolific auctioneer. I think that would you consider your path into fundraising normal? Because I wouldn't consider it very normal for auctioneers.
No, I would say, my path even into the business isn't terribly normal.
Yeah, totally. Well, talk to us, talk to the audience about just because I mean this in the best possible way, because I think you have I know that it's going to become very evident as we talk more, but your approach to fundraising is very pragmatic. It's different. It's refreshing. We speak a similar language. When I say we, you, Jason, myself. But your approach to fundraising is really, really cool. But yeah, let's go back to what got you in. I mean, because I'm just going to tell the audience, you're a world-class auctioneer. You're top 10 world, in the world auto auctioneer. That's your full-time quote unquote job. But you weren't doing auctions, when you were 20, so what got you in the space? Yeah.
Yeah. I started out as a professional buyer. I used to broker commodities, meaning everything from servers back in the early 90s to industrial goods and that kind of stuff, manufacturing equipment. So I was a buyer and I would broker that stuff around the world.
Yeah.
And that kind of the abbreviated story is that segued into me managing a pretty large, in fact, the largest public, open to the public auction in Arizona for many years. And then I kind of accidentally went to auction school. I was learning appraisal and I needed a couple of initials after my name to do some appraisals for the company I was managing. And I thought, I hire auctioneers. I'll stick around for the auctioneering part of that class. And I was pretty quickly good at it. And 9 months later, I quit my job and became a full-time contract auctioneer. And yeah, and so speaking of how that segued into the nonprofit space, I immediately was a car auctioneer. So I was doing wholesale car dealer auctions. I sold huge amounts of real estate. I mean, I've sold property in Vegas for $450 million. So that was kind of how I became an auctioneer very quickly. And I had the good fortune of pretty early in the first couple of years, being asked to do a nonprofit fundraiser with no training per se, no formal training in that space, and really no advice in that space, quite frankly. But I think, a lot of people might look at that as detrimental. The reality is I wasn't kind of marred by formalistic training, right? I got to kind of forge my own path.
Yeah. Yeah. Ignorance. I call it ignorance is bliss. You
completely.
know what I mean? And I say that about us, right? You know what I mean? And so, so I think there's a lot of similarity there. Yeah.
Now, I'm also not going to say I was hugely effective right away, right? I also didn't know a lot of things too.
Yeah.
But that, naturally growth occurs over time. And that was 16 years ago that I did my first fundraiser.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of the path I took. And frankly, I really haven't taken much formal training outside of working with nonprofits, almost on purpose, really.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say education isn't of value. Don't get me wrong. I've just had a lot more on the job training than most. And I had a public speaking background since the time I was a kid that I could translate into this. And I did voiceover work and things for radio and the like. So, I've had a nice blend of experience over time that has lent itself towards being an effective auctioneer. But I've also learned a lot about these fundraisers, these nonprofit, in the nonprofit space. There's a lot more to it naturally than just going and talking fast, or maybe some other people would be more effective at it if that were solely it. though I like to think I rank pretty high
Yeah,
as an
you
auctioneer.
can talk plenty fast. But like
Yeah, so
you said it, I mean, like obviously, if you're a world class auto auctioneer, it's not going to make you a great fundraiser. We can all agree, but you've had this, and I would say once again, as like ignorance is bliss. I say that very, very respectfully about us, right? Like I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I'm a quick study, like you said, education has its place for sure. But like you and I are similar in that sense. Where like I want to get in there and do it. You know what I mean?
right,
And I will also say this, and in similarity, once again, in that vein, I think enthusiasm will get you a very long way.
for sure.
Um, but um,
And you have lots of that, by the way.
yeah, we both
Yeah,
do.
we share
I
that.
mean, yeah, exactly. And there's that curiosity and what have you. And so, like, so, you know, your whole approach with events. Let's just talk about. It's like, it's like a canned phrase, like building a memorable experience. But you're very scientific. Like I've seen how fastidious that you are about
Sure.
pre-event, everyone being on the same page, and you know, the approach, the scientific approach that you've taken to making events memorable. Once again, so we can maximize fundraising night of, but also we're really trying out, quote unquote, for next year as well, right? And making sure folks
Sure.
want to come back. Yeah, let's just talk about that and just like what you've learned and how you've honed that skill about it. Just like let's make this as memorable as possible and kind of what that means in your words.
Sure. Well, if you singularly look at it from an auctioneering perspective, the auction itself, right? Because a lot of these events have an auction, some don't, and I'm a part of several that don't.
Yeah.
But if I were to isolate just the auction itself, right? That there's only, and I think you and I've spoken about this over lunch, right? There's in the room, if there's, let's say, 500 people at an event, of those 500 people, they're depending on how, you know, depending on the people in the room, right? There's a handful or maybe a couple of handfuls of people who can participate actively in the live auction economically, right? Or have the desire to, or haven't already bought the same thing, because a lot of organizations, unfortunately, will have the same thing over and over. And that's something we can talk about secondarily about how do we overcome that.
Yeah.
But how do you engage and entertain and keep the attention of everyone else in the room outside of those handfuls of people who might participate in the live auction and who didn't buy the first package, right? And now we might not have their participation on the remaining 3, 5, 7 packages, whatever that might be. And so that's where I think being a real legitimate auctioneer comes into play, and being able to entertain while you're doing it. And, not a lot of people meet an auctioneer outside of these kind of events, right? They may, in their personal life, they may have never met one. And so they're intrigued by the fast talk. That's the first thing people ask. Are you the guy that talks fast and goes hummina, 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 right? That's what I hear.
Exactly. Me too.
So first of all, there's engagement in that, but oftentimes I'm because I do have a public speaking background, I'm often serving in the capacity of an MC, or naturally there's often a live auction followed by a paddle raise, or whatever other things they might do that are add-on components to raising money. So going back to your original question, yeah, I think all of those things are important in keeping the attention of people and keeping people entertained, but not just entertained. They're being entertained while you're frankly extracting money from their wallets to help support an incredible nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that has to do with the groundwork that you lay before you ever go to the event, right? And spending time with, understanding. You and I have talked about this a bit, and I don't want to, not that we have a script, because this is very organic. I love your podcast for that reason, even as a watcher. But I think it's important to. I kind of lost track of where I was going because I was so.
Well, I was gonna. You kind of took it, and I was just telling you with my hands. I was like, "Yeah, keep going, Brett," because we were talking about creating memorable experience, but you were talking about more to the point, like making sure we, the work that we do pre-event. And I was going to kind of like double down on like, how do you help folks get the right people in the room and things of that nature pre-event and all those things that, kind of go in that equation as well. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I can't fake to know everything about every organization and what conversations happen with their board and the like. All I can do is ask the questions, um, and allow them to speak to that and kind of do their own math. So going back to that, how do you get the right people in the room? That's a big question every nonprofit
Yeah.
has,
Yeah. Of
right?
course. Yeah. Yeah.
But a lot of that is conversations that you just have, making them talk out loud, quite frankly. In sort of the same way you would with a therapist, right? You go and you talk out loud, and therefore it's therapeutic. So I encourage them, hey, have conversations with your board and give consideration to those who purchase tables, and ask the question, who are you inviting and with what purpose? Is it just because they want to have a nice, you know, steak and chicken dinner or whatever that might be that is at a lot of these events, and get to dress up and have some cocktails? I mean, then take them to dinner. Um,
Yeah.
but but if you're going to just do that, that's one thing. But have the conversation, like a purposeful conversation with your board. Hey, let's think strategically about what we're trying to do. First of all, we're trying to raise money. So let's talk about, who are you inviting and why, and do they have capacity, right? Can they support us? Will they support us? And in what ways, right? It isn't always economic. There's volunteerism, and there's whether they can add something from their own business or their own acumen that can help us raise money from other people, maybe if it's not money they have themselves. But I think all of that is just talking, right? Have a conversation and think strategically. I think the tendency is, in a nonprofit or when you do anything for a living, right? We sort of get caught up in it sometimes, and we might not stop to think, right? I say meditate, and I don't mean it in the, cross your legs and sit on the floor and hum and close your eyes. No disrespect to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, really meditate on, what am I trying to accomplish and how do I accomplish that? And a lot of that is just thinking and stopping to do that.
I think you say, another way you could phrase that is like just being intentional. And I just, when you get caught in the day to day and you're the development director or the ED or the CEO or all the above, you're caught in the day to day, and when you're planning an event, you're wearing 14 hats. You might not be great at it, frankly, no offense. I get it. Like, so you need all the help you can get. You mentioned the board a couple of times, and I have to touch on that. Do you notice, is it your experience? And if so, how do you coach folks out of it? Do you notice a lot of folks have trepidation? And you don't have to say yes, but you notice a lot of folks that you speak to have trepidation about, like, oh, should I ask my board? Or, oh, we've never considered doing that. Or, like that kind of, any feedback like that? Because it just seems to be a trend, or just like really a pattern in our space where folks are like, oh, I don't know if I can ask him that, or blah, blah, blah. like, is it okay if we do that? Which we think is normal. So
it's naive to think everyone, is a great leader.
Yeah.
And I'm not disrespecting anyone. I'm fortunate to work with a ton of great leaders.
Yeah.
But also people who aren't that, experienced or seasoned yet, even some early startup nonprofits. Most of mine are pretty developed at this point, but I have a new client, for example, it's a first time event. They've never done it. And so, sometimes they just don't know. But it's also important to have conversations with them as, outside of being an auctioneer, but also being a consultant, is oftentimes whatever you start, it's really hard to unstart, right? It's really hard to undo. So if you're going to take the lead, or you're going to have your board take the lead, which one is it? And a lot of times the nonprofit leader falls into the trap of, by the way, a lot of people on boards often have capacity and are supportive and are leaders in their own space, right? Whatever. A lot of them are, they might be doctors or attorneys, depending on the nature of your nonprofit. And so they're they're capable and maybe outspoken themselves, right? And they can overrun a leader, and they're like, well, I have the money and I'm bringing a lot of these people in. And so they kind of take control. And so that's where a leader needs to maybe educate themselves, but also learn how to speak a little bit differently and allow those people to lead a portion of your nonprofit efforts, right? To your fundraising efforts. Um, but but at some point, you have to take control and still enable them to help you make decisions and utilize the wonderful gifts that a lot of them have as leaders to help them and not rule them. And that's hard, right? That's not,
Yeah.
especially if that's not your inherent leadership style.
Totally. And it's just, this is a very prevalent conversation. Every conversation that we ever have always comes back to, at some point, not like it's the compass, but it's like, hey, how do I get my board involved, or how do I get them to fundraise more or whatnot? And Jason eloquently, he's like, hey, listen, like on a webinar a couple weeks ago, he's like, the board's there to do three things: hire and fire the CEO or executive director, offer oversight, finances, okay, cool, and fundraise. It's those three
Sure.
things. If someone wants to color outside the lines, that's fine. And, it's like, it requires the CEO ED to be, hey, listen, you hired me to do a job. Now I'm leaning on you to do number three, which is help us fundraise. You know what I mean? Like, I'm here, you're not going to fire me. Okay, cool. We got, everyone approved the budget. Okay, great. Let's fundraise now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you guys have one of your podcasts speaks to that. So they should go back and maybe re-listen or listen to that.
Oh,
For
yeah.
time.
And we
But
talk about boards incessantly, man, because I just know it's a
sure.
problem for so many leaders in the space. Yeah, that's why I wanted you to like double click on it. It was like, just, yeah, how do you coach folks up? And like you said, it doesn't come naturally to a lot of folks just to, they look up to the board members so much. We've been almost conditioned to do that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't respect the board, of course, right? But we're all there to do a job. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and look, if you've started out wrong and you've allowed them to kind of rule you, then look, then maybe have a conversation that's very candid. Hey,
Yeah.
look, maybe this was a shortcoming of mine, or maybe I failed to properly lead early on. But here's what I've learned: you guys are incredible, and you're wonderful leaders, and I need you, and I can't do this without you. But let's have some conversations, and just the back and forth, and kind of retaking the leadership role, or taking it for a first time, and maybe just step back and think about how can I approach that in a way that is unobtrusive, or not insulting a person's value, because they're valuable and you need them, right? But
Totally. Yeah.
yeah,
They're
but
typically
look,
there.
I'm not in every board meeting, right? So it's hard for me to speak to that, other than I know from feedback I've gotten from working with a lot of nonprofits that it's something worthwhile. It's something worthy of investigating and worthy of tackling.
There's two things that came to mind when you mentioned I'm working with a nonprofit that's hosting their first event. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I love it, But one of the questions was that I had for you is, you, I'll say it like, for lack of a better explanation, like, it's unorthodox, I think, and I appreciate that as a result. You specifically don't talk to your organizations that you work with and help about fundraising goals. And
Yeah,
I want you to explain to the audience why, and what's the impetus for this, and the outcome as a result. Yeah.
sure. Well, I guess the very quick and concise answer is it doesn't change my effort. Right. My effort is 100% all in every single time. And now, to piggyback on that comment, um, a lot of times those numbers that people want to raise are either arbitrary, or they're based on previous years and we want to exceed that, and or by a certain percentage. And I applaud that. But I don't ask, because the reality is my effort is my effort. I don't work on a percentage. Okay. That's kind of something I haven't done by choice. But set that aside, I'm all in every single time. And your goals I want you to hit them, and I want you to be stoked, and I want you to give me high fives and hugs and get makeup on the collar of my jacket, right? After the event is over.
Yeah.
But it isn't going, I don't want it to be solely because you hit a number. And look, I want you to exceed the numbers like crazy. That's, I am still a business, right? And I want you to hire me back, but I really love you and your organization. I want you to be successful. So, how can we get every dollar, extract every dollar that was there to get? And look, that doesn't factor in things like the political environment or economic things. Is it election year? How close are you to that? Did you not think when you set the date of how close it was, how late in the fundraising season it was? And a lot of those dollars are already accounted for. They already allotted. Yeah, exactly. So there's factors that I can't control, for one, right? And quite frankly, most nonprofits can't. There are maybe setting your date or changing your date or whatever. But a lot of those other factors are just concerns of people. And they may not give you as much as they would have given you if it weren't an election year or we weren't in a tough economic time or tariffs or whatever conversations that you want to have about how it could affect fundraising. The reality is it does. But again, I don't want to be penalized or have you look down on me for not hitting a goal. And maybe that's my own conscience that says, hey, if you don't tell me what it is, I don't know whether you hit it or not. Right? But that's not really my point. My point is that those other things don't factor into my effort. And I want you to raise every dollar there was to get. I want people to give when they're more than they even gave in the room, because I made it and, said, hey, maybe we didn't outline a level that was meaningful to you in the paddle raise, or maybe you had allotted a certain amount, or maybe you prefer to give anonymously, whatever that is. Please let them know when you check out this evening if you'd like to give a little bit more, or if you'd like to give throughout so that's money that I can't, that isn't necessarily accounted for from the auction on stage and the numbers that they look at, but it might happen afterwards. And I may never hear about it, quite frankly. Yeah. I mean, I debrief with my clients afterward to talk about, hey, what things went really well? What should we repeat? What maybe has run its course? What can we change? How can we improve? Those are all conversations we're going to have afterwards. But again, the night of, when it is actually, when you are on stage and you're behind a mic and you're talking to people and tugging on their heartstrings and or their competitive juices or whatever it is that drove them to give, right? Not everybody gives from their heart. Some give from ego or competition or whatever. Mm-hmm. And we want all of them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But again, my effort is how can I get every single penny that there was to get and then some? I want them to have to go to the bank afterwards, right? But again, that's why I don't ask, because 100% is 100%.
I get you. You said something very interesting about people's proclivity and what motivates them to give. And because of your extensive experience being an auctioneer, now you've been a full-time world-class auto auctioneer. You learn a lot about bidder behavior and motivation.
Sure.
You've learned a lot, pardon me, and you're learning still in real time, all the time. Talk about, different auction strategies and an auctioneer style. We discussed this before, like a style that suits folks' motivation to give in a particular room and things like that folks can take away, which is like making sure you have the right person, so to speak, for, your crowd, or making sure you hire a professional. We'll talk to the efficacy of that, but just making sure that you have someone that really understands folks' motivation in real time, so you can maximize every dollar and account for every possible dollar in the room. Yeah.
Sure. Well, look, when I meet with a client, oftentimes I'll use this analogy or illustration, right? If you were going to have, you have a pet that's sick. Let's say you have a dog and it's sick, and you need to bring it to a vet. right? Are you gonna bring it to a vet that might have maybe possibly perhaps done this before? Or maybe they've done it 20 times? Or do you want one that has done it many, many times and knows the things to look for and how to effectively treat your dog, right? Which is near and dear to your heart. And I think that's the benefit, right, of just time spent. Experience, right, goes a long way. A lot more, quite frankly, than education. And so I'm in the fortunate spot, as you mentioned, to being a car auctioneer, right, where I'm dealing with professional buyers, right, um, who don't have a lot of. They're working on pretty tight margins, okay, and they have pretty definitive numbers, and I say pretty definitive numbers on paper as to what they're going to pay for a car that's got a fairly tangible value.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been fortunate to witness that even body language and knowing what signs or, if we were playing poker, we'd say what tells people give, that sometimes are invisible to the average eye. And that by acclimation and having spent so much time in that environment, you learn to read what people are willing to do and how much they're willing to pay and what you mentioned triggers. So in the car environment, and I'll go from that into the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
In the car environment, I know that this dealer is a Honda dealer, and so is this dealer. And I know that they don't particularly like each other and they're competitors. So I might actually use one of their names so that the other one is aware that he's being beat right now by Chuck, who's another competitive Honda dealer. And I've done that purposefully so that he feels it, right? He doesn't want to get beat by Chuck. And I might say Chuck's in the lead. And I'm doing that very purposefully. There's psychology involved in this.
Yeah.
But also I can look at a dealer before he's even raised his hand once or winked at me or whatever it is that their bidding style is. And I already know who's going to bid on that car because people give away information before they ever say a word or nod their head or wink their eye. So that's with professional buyers, right? Who can actually be moved emotionally and competitively. Now take the weights off the bat, so to speak, and go to a fundraiser where you don't have as experienced buyers, right? Who can be moved emotionally by what you say and how you say it and the tone of voice and the pace. And you and I've talked about this because I view this as a game of chess often, where even though they're not against me, I'm playing chess against them. And so I might just simply nod my head, and you'd be surprised how often you're doing it now, right? How often people nod their head and it's kind of like the more you say yes, the more inclined other people are to say yes. I might notice a person kind of looking, just the facial expression, I can feel they have more to give. And so sometimes I may, depending on the group, the age of the group there, there's different, obviously there's, for sure. The demographic for every event is different. If it's a younger crowd, I might just stop in the middle of auctioneering real fast and let them feel the pressure, right? Just sit in it for a second.
I felt the pressure like our internet went down for a second.
And I might actually say, everybody's looking at, right? Yeah. Now there's a fine line. I wouldn't do that at the opera, right? That crowd is a different crowd and they might not like that. But what they might like is different. And I know that going in, I've prepared. And, that kind of, we've spoken to that a bit, right? Those are just a couple of quick that's a little bit of the low-lying fruit that I think just, I do 220 auctions a year. I'm much more inclined to see those things than a person who does 5.
Right.
But it kind of does segue to another conversation that I love to kind of speak of, and that is when you work with someone over and over again, you get the benefit of, but as an auctioneer, I get the benefit of knowing the demographic of your crowd, knowing their personality as as a group, right? And even individuals, you learn who they are. There's huge benefit too in that I mentioned earlier, debriefing, right? It's one thing to debrief and say, hey, this went well this year. But it's another conversation to say, hey, remember in 2024, we spoke about this, and I applaud you for being malleable, willing to mold yourself around the experience and learn from it and grow. And we do that together, where we can say, hey, we didn't do this in 2024. We did it in 2025, and look at the net result. Look at how much better the experience was. Look at how we compelled people to give and moved them. And we made some adjustments. You did a wonderful job of tailoring a video versus having a person speak, which is sometimes uncontrollable. You can mix in music. It moves people's emotions differently. Kind of like when you watch a movie without sound, without the music in the background. Star Wars is boring without the music.
Totally.
But when you add it, now there's emotion, right? And it's a totally different film.
Yeah.
And so the same can be said for an event, right? How do we change things? What can we do to change it to keep people coming back, looking forward to something being different rather than the same kind of meal, same kind of experience, same kind of auction, same paddle raise? How do you do it differently that will garner more giving the night of the event? And I think there's great value in working with someone over and over again, as long as there's success that follows that trail, right?
Totally.
I'm fortunate to have recurring clients that we grow together, right? I learn from them too. Conversations that they have based on the experience. Someone said this, they thought there was too much talking. And so then we have conversation. And, that's what I said from the outset, right? We just have conversation. What did we learn? What was the experience of people sitting in the room? And oftentimes when you're immersed in the organization, it's really hard to put yourself in the seat of someone who's never been there before. You know too much a lot of times, right? So how do we speak? I'll oftentimes have people raise their hand like, how many people have been to this event before? How many people have supported such and such an organization? And you'd be surprised how many hands go up.
Yeah.
And then I'll still raise hands of how many have been here before. But you'd be surprised how many haven't been. And it's a pretty significant proportion year after year.
It's not even bad. It's not like churn or, it's like, oh, we're not doing a good job. It just goes to show you that is real. That's happening so much at so many events. Well, I think it's actually a good thing because it's exposure, right? Right. It doesn't mean you lost the donors necessarily or the supporters that didn't come this year, but just the fact that more people are coming, I think is a great thing because it exposes more people to the mission, right? I mean,
100%. I think it's a filtering, essentially, right?
Yeah.
The sincere and those who are invested in what you're doing and their heart is inclined, they'll come back.
Sure.
And maybe circumstantially one or two won't, right? But when you have new people, you have to speak to them. And I think a lot of times it's what I mentioned, right? A lot of times when you're immersed in the organization, you know so much that it's almost in your way. So putting yourself in the chair, I have conversations like, hey, we need to let people know what you do. Right. And it's simplistic. It's so easy to say, oh, well, we got to tell them what we do. And we think we do, but how do we tell that story? Can we show in video, depending on the sensitivity of the organization, right? If it's sex and human trafficking and, that kind of thing, sexual exploitation and human trafficking, you're not going to highlight a person to speak of. And I work with several of those kinds of organizations. Naturally, there's a sensitivity issue. So you can't take video of that person carrying on in their daily lives, but you can show how do we help rebuild their lives, maybe even not in real, it doesn't even have to be blacked out with their voice disguised, right? Sometimes it can be showing the organization inside internally and what they're doing, and talk to people who are on the part of the side of that affect that outcome that's so positive. And how do we tell that story to a person who's never been here before? And even still engage the people who have. And there's ways to accomplish that, but you don't know until you kind of sit outside of your experience to then think, okay, that's a good conversation we're having. And that's why that's kind of falls back to the earlier conversation about having conversations and getting intimately to know the organization and know how they're built and how they're run. And it's nice when you have the relationship that you do over time, where you can have candid conversations about good and bad, and humbly listen, because it's all for the purpose of self-improvement. It's never to insult or hurt feelings or whatever. It's to grow, right? Um, that's not. That's why you smack your kid's hand when they touch a hot stove. It's not to punish them. It's to train them to get better, right? And so you grow from those sometimes negative experiences, make you even way more successful.
Yeah. You said
Sorry,
something
I talk
about
for a living, so I have a tendency to keep
no,
on going.
brother, it's great. It's fantastic. Thank you. Keep it coming, man. No,
Yeah.
and you said I caught you nodding right there. Yeah, that's because I got coaching. And that's how I shut up. I nod. Otherwise, I'll be that's what I'll be doing. So, no, this is me just becoming. This is this is a podcast version 2.0 for me, right? But because the first one was like, oh yeah, over. But you said something very interesting to me, and I know you're pro event and gathering in person, and I'm not typecasting you or telling you your opinion, but I got a pretty good idea, right?
We
is
know
something
each other pretty well, yeah.
Yeah, we believe in this. What do you the importance of gathering and exposing folks to the organization. New people, and the fact that you're seeing new people come to these events that you go around the sun with multiple times. I mean, what do you say to folks that are like, hey, you don't need events. Hey, we don't need to gather in a group. And I'm not asking to get on a soapbox or get chippy or anything like that. If you want to get chippy, get chippy. But like, what do you say to folks that are like, hey, you don't need that though? You don't need to gather. You don't need to have an event. You don't need to have a live auction, for instance. What do you say to the folks that are kind of on their soapbox saying that?
Well, I mean, as negative of an event as COVID was, right?
Yeah.
It certainly helps make that argument that people need to gather. And even economically, the fruitage was far greater after COVID, even when people were still uncertain, but were gathering, versus during COVID when they weren't. Now, people's economics were different. There's certainly that factoring in, but it is a testimony to the value of people getting together, and yes, you can accomplish some things outside of that. I think I like both, quite frankly.
I'm an
Right?
person myself.
Yeah. So let's tie that to an actual live event.
Okay.
You and I've talked about this because I'm a big believer in thinking about who's in your room, right?
Yeah.
So I'm still speaking to your question by this example.
Yeah.
But at an event, right, oftentimes you have a live auction with maybe some trips and experiences. I mean, HGA helps benefit organizations in that way. But the reason HGA is successful in that regard is those are things people want. the greater majority of people, not everybody wants a brand new computer because they have it, or not everybody wants a razor, to enjoy out. I mean, a lot of people do, right? Everybody goes on vacation. Everybody wants to go somewhere. Everyone wants to travel. Um, so I'm going to put myself in the room, right? I make a nice living. I'm not wealthy. I'm not poor, but I do well. And I go on a trip with my wife every year. We love going on you and I've talked about that because we've been planning a vacation. So, there are then you have a paddle raise, right? And let's face it, a lot of the people who, let's say we start our paddle raise at $100,000, a person who has $100,000, they can book whatever trip they want, right? And they can buy most everything they want within bounds. So with that in mind, why do we do both? Because if I'm in your room and you have a trip or package of experiences coupled with that I might want, you'll get my $10,000. But you won't get my $10,000 if you just have a paddle raise. I don't have that kind of money where I can just fork over $10,000 to every organization who has an event that I go to, right? But I might be inclined to buy a trip or two over the course of the night or a couple of events. So I say that because I think both are important if you're going to be successful, right? And I think having other things that allow other people in the room who might not have the capacity or desire to do either one of those, how do we get something from them?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you have 500 people, that's the number we used earlier in the room.
Yeah.
How can I get 100 from everybody?
Yeah.
Right. That might be what one of your live auction packages sell for, or like someone else raising their hand to give $5,000. So I think that speaks to why you have to do multiple different things to be successful. And I think having an event accomplishes a very important part of fundraising. And I think what you do when you're not at the event and how you engage the community outside of that is hugely important. But I think one by itself isn't compounded as well as it is when you do multiple different things to raise money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
experiment, right? And you know what I think the more I have these conversations, Brett, and the more I see and whatnot, I just, you know what I also realize? It's getting more difficult, right? It's getting more difficult. I think we could all kind of agree. Maybe, I mean, hey, some people have lightning in a bottle. I got this figured out. Great. I wish them success. Fantastic. Respect. But maybe it requires, if you want to be prolific at this, that you do all those things, or you put enough people in the seats or get enough people on the bus, so to speak, where you have them, okay, this person does this person does this. I'm really good at the major. Okay. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you have to hire a big giant shop and all that stuff, but do you get what I'm saying? It's like, we just got to sharpen the pencil. It's like, everyone's like, oh, AI. Oh, we just need major gifts. Oh, we like, there's so much and we're so over indexed. And I'm creating a thesis that it's just that's what's required. Not one thing, all of it. Right. And I'm not saying you have to be exceptional at all those things. That's why we lean on people. The whole thing's
sure.
Right. You know what I mean? But I think it requires everything to be successful, to grow, at least to grow the organization. It's going to require all those things. So
for sure. Well, look,
go ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, please.
Look, we're all unique people, right? With unique personalities.
Yeah.
You and I talked a lot about our interests outside of fundraising, and it isn't the only thing we are or what we do. I love golf.
Yeah.
And you're not a golfer.
Yeah.
But I don't love to swim, and I'm not doing a triathlon like you are.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's not of interest to me. We're all different people, and different things appeal to us, right? Some people love getting together. Other people hate social interactions. They'd rather hide behind a computer or at home or wherever it is that appeals to them and their personality. And we want all of them supporting our nonprofit endeavor. And so going back to that, right? It might be that you're not going to get any money from them if you invite them to your gala, because they might not go. They don't love being in crowds or showing, they don't like giving in front of people, but maybe they have the desire to do that behind closed doors or more intimately. And so just like you and I are different, in regard to our personal interests in our private lives, we are different in our, you and I are very symbiotic in regard to our love for fundraising and nonprofits and how do we serve them. And we have a lot more conversations about that than outside of that. But we're still different, right? And the things that appeal to me are going to be different than what appeals to someone else. And every one of those 500 people are composed differently. And that's the wonderful thing about mankind. But let's get all of their money to help our nonprofit be successful.
Well, you just said that again. I've been dying to ask you this since we started talking, because you keep coming back to it. You're like, my job is to get every dollar that's in that room. I don't hear a lot of people talk like that. And one of the best fundraisers that I ever heard works for Ducks Unlimited, and really, really strong, and does a lot of events. And he said, listen, our job is to get every dime that we can in that room that night. And that means if someone didn't get the live auction on they want, we're walking them over to a silent auction table to show them, something else, because they were ready to spend, let's get, and so I love that that's your approach. I wish more people just kind of just like had that same approach. It's like, this is our time. This is our chance to do this. We need to get every possible dime that we can. How are you, when you're introducing that concept, so to speak, that IP to different organizations you work with, what kind of recommendations are you making? Now, I understand the science and what you know in between your ears about behavior and bidding. And I know in my bones that you're going to get more out of a live auction bidder than a lot of people on the street, so to speak, because you understand that psychology. But even broader than that, like, how are you coaching organizations to be like maximizing this? I mean, like, I don't care if it's like an extra $10 per attendee and it's a 500 person room. Like, give the audience some things they might not have thought of that you've imparted upon the organizations that you have the opportunity to help, and how you've coached them and what you've seen, like, just success wise, about extracting every dollar that you can at events.
Sure. So I have a good example of one that I've used with multiple organizations, and maybe I'm giving away, secrets.
That's why you're
okay.
here.
I'm here to help nonprofits.
Sorry.
But my nonprofits are beneficiaries of this as well. But using the state of Arizona, for example, there's tax incentive depending on the category of nonprofit that you are. And the state of Arizona will give you a dollar for dollar. They'll give you dollar for dollar what you spend as an individual or couple. I think my memory is as short as my stature. And I'm 6'4". No,
yeah.
But I think the amount in Arizona for couples last year was $942.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Better yet, individuals, it's 421 or something like that.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a $250 level typically in their paddle raise or ask or fund a need, however you want to class it. I've encouraged several of my clients to change that to $421, because a lot of it is, how do you have the conversation, right? I mentioned, how do you have the conversation with your board? Now I'm having a conversation with those people who are in the room at your event, right? Now I'm on stage.
Yeah.
And I have a conversation with my client. I know you normally have $250 paddle raise level. Let's ask for 421 or whatever. I forget the amount.
I'm say it is though.
I think it's 421.
Yeah.
So with that said, I say, let's make that the level, but let's tell them why. And so the conversation from the stage is, ladies and gentlemen, this may sound like a random number, but it's not. And here's why. Because the state of Arizona is going to give you a dollar for dollar refund with your taxes if you give $421 tonight.
Yeah.
So you're going to lend it to this organization. They're going to get the full benefit of those dollars, but you're just lending it short term because at the end of the year, you're going to get that entire amount back if you give it right now.
Love it.
So that's how you have a conversation and how you frame it. But they got the difference between 250 and 4. And now maybe there is some attrition at that $250 level, but how many
obviously make up
the
for it.
difference times a bunch. And by the way, it doesn't mean you still can't do 250.
Sure.
We're just going to insert another level.
Yeah.
And so that's just one way
Yeah.
that you can have that conversation. And or maybe maybe it's your 25th anniversary. And so every single paddle raise level, you ask for $25 more. Right? Maybe that's not big at the $50,000 level, but how many people who are giving 125 versus 100?
Yep.
And now you add that times the 500 people in the room because you tried to get everybody in the room to raise their hand. How many? And you wait for everybody to raise their hand so that peer pressure will allow them to feel that moment, right?
Yep.
But that, like I stopped earlier in the middle of a live auction.
Yeah.
Give them time. Right? That's time well spent. Those 20 seconds from the stage is awkward. Pause.
Oh, yeah.
But think of the conversation when they're looking around or people are looking around at their table and one person doesn't have their hand up. And now that's not me doing it. That's them. Right. And
I'm the kind of guy who would say, hey, man, get your paddle. I'm that kind of guy at the table.
Those are the conversations that happen at a table.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Right? Sometimes that's what we need, but you wouldn't do it if you didn't have it.
Good call.
And I've shared this statistic before, and I can't find it in print anymore. But when I first started in the auction business, quite frankly, as a fundraiser, 96% of the people or 93% of the people that go to a fundraising event had more to give, but weren't given an outlet that appealed to them. And so that's why I mentioned live auction, paddle raise. How do we have conversations? How do we get something out of everybody? And I think that's one thing to think about, right? Is what ways can we do it?
Well, especially now with this climate, Brett, it's like, and like I said, I mean, I admit it. It just means you have to be better. It's like that in business sometimes. You're called you're called to task on certain things, or just things get pulled out from underneath you, or someone leaves, or it's like, we still got to do it. We still got to serve these people. We still got to make payroll, whatever it might be, insert, why. It just means we got to sharpen the pencil, and those opportunities are there. What's also very interesting, and I'm happy to have you, speak to it or your opinions about it. There's a lot in the headlines. There has been for a minute. Yes, we just came out of an election year, all those things, a lot going on. I get it. I'm not one of those people that spends too much time on that kind of stuff. I'm not silly. And I don't have my head in the sand. I can't add to it. I can't bring any value to it. So I don't spend a lot of time with it. Happy to talk about it. There's something interesting though. There's a tremendous amount of money in the system. B, there's a tremendous amount of money being made right now, and there will continue to be. I'm not talking about wealth and income disparity. I don't want to go down that path. There is a lot of wealth being created in record numbers across all demographics, across all generations. You could be a boomer, you could be Gen Z. There's a lot of wealth being created. Whatever you want to apply that to. Are you talking to a lot of orgs? I mean, because I love the idea of like just adding this one little thing to the fun and need at the end. This one, it doesn't seem like much, but it's going to have a massive impact and what have you, and impact this many people that we serve or whatever. Are you talking to folks about like, hey, take a deep breath. We're going to be we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do this. And we might have to sharpen the pencil a bit. But I mean, like, are you talking to folks about the economics involved and whatnot? Are you having to talk folks off I don't want to say the ledge. Andrew, you got to edit that out. But I don't want to be insensitive. But you get my point. I'm just speaking
the metaphorical ledge.
The fear. That folks have about, like, are we not going to do it? Like, there's a tremendous amount of money in the system, and I don't want to say that to be flip, but it's real. I mean, how are you coaching up organizations in that regard, as far as just understanding the potential?
I'm not going to say I don't speak to the politics of anything either.
Yeah.
I mentioned that the only time I'll mention it is, hey, maybe it has an effect on the outcome. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I make no presumptions. Look, people have different tendencies. I think it's easy to wonder. And look, when a lot of depending on the size of the organization and a person's role within an organization, I understand nerves and fear and wonder and hope and all those expressions that are fluctuant based on whatever's happening around.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand how that would have cause for concern leading up to an event or at an event, and the wonderment and the concern, everyone. And by the way, there's so much pressure on the people that are involved in an organization, right? From the leaders down to the person who set up a table to have in the silent, to put silent auction items on. Both roles are imperative, right? But that's a stressful time. When you really put yourself in the role of those people, I show up pretty early for an event. I do sound checks and I make sure that everyone's in a good space. Going back to that for a second, speaking of the nerves, there was an organization I work with several years in a row who, night of the event, the person who was the soul had the predominant role in the night of the event, right? And making sure every T got crossed and every I got dotted. We're not going to see, there's no space on the stage for people to take pictures because the DJ set up on the stage and he took up half the stage. And I'm there early enough to have a conversation like, okay, hey, let's just have a conversation. Let's not focus on the problem. How can we create a solution, right? So we went up to the stage and we talked to the DJ. Hey, can you move back here to the other side of the stage where it's not in the way of the podium? There's room for people to take pictures who've been given an award and blah, 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 blah. And it's a nice leveling of emotions that sometimes you need because everyone's so stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in that role, it's very stressful. And, depending on your relationship with the CEO of the organization or president, you're worried about what are they going to think and ultimately it's still their job, right? They're on the payroll. They're worried. A lot of their job has been leading up to this one night. I'm working with I just took a contract for 2027 a little while ago, and I'm booking 3 years out now, which is a wonderful problem for me, right? Yeah. Hard for organizations to plan that, but they're planning pretty far out in advance.
Smart.
So a lot is coming down to the night of this event.
Yeah.
So I understand nerves, concern, worry about everything that night, including the things you asked me about, which are politics and the environment that we live in and what's happening economically. And yes, there's money out there, and then there's not because the grants are removed and blah, blah. There's always every year there's something to be concerned about.
There will always be something, I think, is the point.
Yeah, we live in a volatile world. It's been that way since the oldest of times, right? Yeah. And whatever the concern of the day is a concern, and it's legitimate and often based on reality.
Yeah.
But we can't control much more than what we've already done. And the outcome is you put all the pieces in place to make sure you had the greatest amount of success possible. And now we execute to the best of our ability. My effort's going to be 100%. The people who are involved in other facets of the evening, the hope is that they're going to give 100%, and the best result that can come out of it will come out of it. And look, it's just like life in general. Sometimes things don't go the way we plan. But all we can do is make sure we put forth every effort we can. And the hard part's done at that point, right?
Yeah. The work's done. You still got to do it. So it's, nothing left to chance,
Yeah. Now I'm the one that gets to go up on stage and try to execute your goals, right?
Let me ask you a couple. Let me ask you a couple like opinionated topic like type questions real quick. So I think some folks in the industry would call them rapid fire, but I want just straight answer. Hit me with what your opinion, like what you think the best answer is. Fun and Eat or live auction first?
Live auction.
Get rid of the silent auction, make the silent auction better.
Make the silent auction better.
So you're pro silent auction?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
I don't even have any involvement in it other than promoting it from the stage. And
but
this isn't
you see it make money though, right?
I know that it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And
the fruitage isn't always what they get out of other facets of fundraising. But again, if you're getting every dollar and 96% of the people that go to a fundraising event had more to give, but weren't given an outlet that appealed to them, maybe they didn't have $5,000 or $2,000 to spend otherwise, but they had 50 or 75, or they wanted to buy their wife a spa treatment for their anniversary. So give them every outlet. If it makes money, then you have to do the value proposition of whether it was worth the time and effort in view of the fruitage, or is there something else we could have done? Could we have done a golden ticket raffle that allowed people to participate differently, and maybe that offset whatever? Maybe it broke even what you would have gotten in a silent auction, but you didn't have to invest all that effort and all the procurement and the setup and the management and the checkout and blah 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 that goes with it. I'm indifferent to silent auction. If they have one, I'll promote the heck out of it. Yeah. Before and during. But I get a lot of feedback that not everyone's a big fan of it.
Just means that I think it could be done better. That's my opinion. But these are not questions for me. These are questions for you, sir.
Yes,
we've seen the live.
That was not rapid fire.
Hey, go figure. You and I just put a break on the rapid fire part. Yeah, go figure.
Yeah.
Shit. Okay. Less is more. We've seen a lot less in the live auction, and for good reason. Less is more as far as total attendees, in your opinion. Are you seeing events where it's shrinking in size, but more deliberate and intentional with who's in the room? And are you a believer in less is more with total attendees?
It's too much of a question to make it rapid fire.
It's tough, huh? Well, yes or no? You think less people is good if you get the right people in the room?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And timeline that kind of, bleeds into the question about like live auction items. Less is more there, it seems like, too. We used to do, 10, 12, 20. Now we're seeing 5, 7, 8.
It depends on the event.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay. Not rapid fire. Take as much time as you need. Accepted premise that fundraising is hard. It requires a lot of work. Let's make it more myopic, though, about event fundraising. Live event fundraising is hard. Don't make it more difficult by doing what?
Oh, man, I don't have a rapid fire answer for that.
Whatever your gut says.
Rephrase the question for me.
Live event fundraising is hard. In-person event fundraising is hard. Don't make it more difficult. If you're an organization, you're speaking to the audience, don't make it more difficult by doing what?
Feeling an obligation to have everybody that helps you speak.
Ooh, good. Yes. Love that. You're talking about like it makes like you mean too many cooks in the kitchen or too many people speaking night of and elongating the timeline?
Too many people speaking the night of.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. This is more rapid fire. In-person speaker or video?
Absolutely video.
Yeah, I figured you would say that. Okay.
There
cool.
are exceptions, okay?
Yep.
But
it takes a very
predominantly
talented
video.
individual, right, to nail that, right?
Controllable, right? You can control the time, the message, the feel. And you can't do that with a person. It's hard to measure their time. They get nervous, they get too outspoken, or they don't speak as emotionally as you would hope. Nerves set in, blah, 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 blah. Video, you can control all of that.
Totally. Love it. Hey, man, this is the shortest time you and I have ever spoke before.
It really is. And it's been lovely. I'm not going to lie.
Well, one of our longest episodes of all time, brother, but I appreciate you so much. Brett
I'm
Higgins,
so grateful, man.
Hey, man, tell everybody where they can find you. What's the easiest way for folks to find you? And I'm putting your business on the street. If folks want to ask you questions about anything that we've covered or anything under the sun, fundraising, auctioneering, all the above, I'm putting you out there so folks can bug you and ask as many questions they like. But what's the best way for folks to find you, brother?
You can go to bretthiggins.com and or find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm not a big online promoter of myself. I've been fortunate to grow without a lot of doing that. But I'm available, and
Awesome.
And that's how you can find me.
We'll
And by all means, feel free to ask questions. I welcome that, and I expect nothing in return except the hope that nonprofits will be successful.
I love it, brother. I love it. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And
likewise, it's such an honor to talk about, man.
Yeah, I really, really enjoy this, man. Thank you so much. We'll put your LinkedIn profile and bretthiggins.com in the show notes that folks can link and access. And like I said, bug the heck out of you, hopefully, with some really, really good questions and go from there. Thank you so much for the time, brother. It means the world to us. Appreciate you.
My pleasure.
All right.
Take care.
See you, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Gratitude is not a transaction. It is an experience. This gratitude piece, it just reinforces that emotional connection, increases that trust. And people give to people, not to organizations. Folks are trusting the nonprofit sector less than for-profit businesses. Ouch.